Hello, traders. Hello, investors. And hello, citizens of the world. So we have an opportunity to hear from Velina Tchakarova today. She's a geopolitical strategist. I've gone through Velina's stream. She has coined things like dragon bear, things that, were not really on the forefront years ago. And Velina just wrote a new piece called Putin's Europe that we're going to delve into. Welcome to TradeGATEHub, Velina. Thank you for granting the interview.
Thank you for having me on your show. It's a big pleasure, big honor.
All right. Well, I'd like to start with how you ended up becoming who you are and doing what you do. Let's turn back the pages of time and go back to say when before you went to the university, wherever you went. Were you already interested in what was happening in the world? What attracted you? And tell us a little bit about the journey of how you ended up becoming a geopolitical strategist.
Well, in fact, this has always been my passion. Even since when I was like 15, 16 years old, I was already into world history,
Okay.
reading about Asian civilizations, about mythology, Greek, Indian
Okay.
mythology, African mythology. So I was really into old history and geography, obviously. I come from a region that has seen so many wars.
Yeah.
Originally, I'm from Bulgaria. I was born during the Cold War, and I was on the other side of, the Iron Curtain. And
Yes.
um, this also opened a lot of, let's say, doors to, history. Think of all the history of the Second World War, because we had this during, classes and geography. And as I said, the Balkans, my region, which also gave another term, the term of Balkanization,
Yes.
splitting a whole into many, many parts so that external actors can interfere and play off different actors against each other on the ground, so local actors. And all of this kind of eventually led to, let's say, a logical path where originally, when I was in my 18, 19s, and still a very ideological person, I wanted to become a diplomat. So I went for this classic study of international relations, which
Yes.
was tailor-made for the future diplomats. By the way, still under the guidance of the old Soviet school of making diplomats, even after 10 years since the end of the Cold War, which was an interesting experience, of course, with a lot of languages and a lot of, again, diplomatic history, history of states from all these periods, but with the big difference that I was already open to interpretations like Ribbentrop-Molotov. We learned about this deal between the Soviet Union at the time and Nazi Germany post Cold War. It wasn't, it wasn't thought before that, just to give you one example.
Yeah.
And I ended up actually working at the foreign ministry as an intern before my state exam. And I realized that I'm not meant for this job, because I was very analytical and I wanted to learn more. And mostly I wanted to actually deal with regions such as Asia. At that time, think of, we already moved to the time of the Afghanistan war and the Iraq
Right.
war, and
Yeah.
there were a lot of NATO and even non-NATO countries that were, helping the United States, contributing to the military missions on the ground. And practically, that was the period when I realized I want to learn more about military conflicts, about realpolitik, what I call the rationale behind, states' actions and states'
Yeah.
calculus. So
You,
this is when I went to Germany. I studied again, this time South Asia, with a
yeah.
focus on India and Pakistan. We are still 20 years, we are still in a period 20 years ago. And obviously, after finishing this study, I wanted to do, to cover Asia, but at that time you will not be surprised to learn that the biggest interest was put on Eastern Europe and Russia. And because of my background, I ended up actually being a researcher for the next 13 years, covering Russia, Ukraine, and all of these countries in between, of course, European Union, European Union, and Russia. And starting with last year, after actually having this career as a researcher and director of a research institute, I decided to launch my own consultancy and start actually consulting mostly the private sector, how to navigate in these complexities of military conflicts, of geopolitics, geoeconomics, explaining to them actually this reasoning of state actors, because a lot of
you actually flashed a memory for me when you talked about the war in Afghanistan, because I remember when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, and Stinger missiles changed the balance of power. And that was the beginning of the end for the Soviet Union. And it looks like the US didn't learn from that. And no one has been successful in Afghanistan, have they? So we don't learn from history. So that's why cycles may not exactly repeat, but they rhyme. And we have so much to cover. Your background is so in depth. I want to get to the new piece that you just wrote. Zelensky just replaced his commander, and you just wrote a piece called Putin's Europe. So why don't you tell us, what you're trying to get across to people? Perhaps there's a lot of complacency about what Russia's doing, and it's just all they want is Ukraine and make a peace deal and it's over. Tell us what the highlights are of that piece, because I'm skeptical that, um, you know, that I'm not complacent about what I see in that theater.
Thank you for this excellent question. And here, once again, I try to present the context of the geoeconomic and the geopolitical warfare, of course, from Russia's perspective. I try to connect all these really important dots of a bigger web. And I'm not claiming that the Russian president is this big strategic thinker. He's still a masterful tactician. But by launching all these different tactical steps and moves over years, meanwhile over 20 years, there has been something new that has emerged, and that's this web of important geopolitical and geoeconomic dots is what I try to convey to the audience, not only to my clients, but also to the public, to explain that it is much more than what we really see, aside from, let's say, for instance, front lines, the conventional warfare. There are invisible layers of the warfare that, the state actor Russia, which is much bigger system than just the Russian president, has masterfully perfectioned, not from the last 20 years, but certainly with the help of toolboxes already from the time of the Cold War. And this is what's happening. So this geoeconomic and geopolitical warfare has different layers. And I will just scaling down to the three most important dimensions of what the calculus behind this decision was. And then I can also present in a next step, the most important, let's say, layers of this context of the Russian warfare. So the three dimensions are obviously the most plausible one linked to the conventional war against Ukraine, where the goal is still the complete political, economic, and societal subjugation of the second largest country on the old continent. It's practically double the size of Poland, and Poland is the fifth largest, country in Europe, and it's one of the most important countries of the European Union. So you can imagine actually the scale and the size of not just territory and population, but importance, and not to speak of the geographic location. So this goal still remains the same. Of course, tactically, the objectives have been changing over the last 2 years, depending on the outcomes on the battlefields. And still, Russia is eyeing, in the long run, is eyeing actually for this outcome. But in the meantime, there will be, of course, adaptations. And right now, Russia is playing for time because it sees an opportunity. And there I go to the second dimension, which is linked to the to the old continent, to Europe, where the goal is actually to destroy the framework, the security architecture, as it has been functioning for the last 30 years. Why? Because there has been a winner of the Cold War. The winner was the United States, and the allies on this side of the Atlantic have been more or less, let's say, secure under this umbrella of the US power projection. And this security architecture was not beneficial for the Russian geopolitical interests. By destroying the security architecture, the framework, what will happen is a chaos, is a new equilibrium of power balance, where there will be countries in Europe which will be Russia-friendly. There will be a shift in governments because of the realities on the ground. Think of the economics, think of also energy, of course, commodities. And this will create realities where Russia will be able to play off European powers against each other. And the third dimension is linked to the big game, to the long game, as I call it, which is actually the competition between the United States and China. Here, Russia, by making a move on Ukraine, destroying the security architecture of Europe, is eyeing the pole position in this systemic rivalry. It wants to be the game changer in this new relationship, because both United States and China will have to consider the Russian, interests. Russia will change the equilibrium if it sides with the one or with the other, which is why we are now hearing all these signals coming from the Republicans. For instance, if Trump wins the election, that he will try to negotiate with Putin. But at the same time, we also clearly see the emergence of this modus vivendi between China and Russia, which I called the dragon bear, that is a coordination based on strategic interests. So these are the three dimensions. Beyond that, there have been very specific instruments of warfare. You mentioned energy. So we saw very clearly that commodities, dependencies on certain commodities have been weaponized. That in the future, having an access to a critical commodity or having the specific geopolitical location, that means, of course, you can mine them on your own, or you can enable someone to mine them in order to process them, as it is the case with China. Or you have the supply chain and so on and so forth, will give you a leverage over others. And in the case of Russia being the biggest combined oil and gas exporter in the world, it has given Moscow an immense leverage over various commodities, specifically food and energy. And we saw it very clearly with the case of the blockade of the Black Sea, where, we had the surging food commodities and a lot of a lot of countries in the global south could not get actually the commodities. But what is new? Next to the commodities and, of course, the fertilizers, a very, very big issue, because you cannot be an agricultural power, let's say, producer of agriculture without the fertilizers. For instance, India is the biggest producer of wheat in the world, not the biggest exporter, but it relies on the fertilizers coming from Russia. This is leverage. This is, this gives you a specific access to strategic partnership. And the new and interesting moment that happened for the very first time was actually the using of the threat with the use of nuclear weapons. So the threat that nuclear weapons may be used was a new moment in the international relations. It was a new kind of weaponization that created horror, psychological, horror on population that was still remembering the time of the Cold War, right? And it gave an additional, access to, let's say, political influence.
Ukrainians had already experienced a nuclear accident, so
exactly,
they knew, right? So I mean, you go through something like that, and it's almost like your country has PTSD from an event like COVID.
But even if you are not in Europe, of course, you still remember the horrors of Chernobyl, the possibility of having a nuclear explosion. That is the one side of the coin. But the horror of imagining that nuclear weapon will be used, which was actually the threat of the use of nuclear weapons, which is a novum, is a new momentum, and it is a geopolitical weapon par excellence. So this was also part of this. Another interesting tool that was used, of course, was actually the weaponization of migration flows. Now, this is a big issue in the United States, as we see, and it is indeed being used by key players as a tool. In the case of Russia's war against Ukraine, we had millions of Ukrainians living, first being internally displaced, and in a later stage also leaving Ukraine. So most of them actually went to countries with, let's say, already serious economic situation in Central Eastern Europe, which were not able, to host so many. All of a sudden, and this created further this destabilization of the situation. Now think of a situation if Russia decides in the next stage, let's say in a year, to mobilize again, to make a move again, what it will mean, of course, for this specific tool of weaponizing migration. So all in all, and of course, in addition, we should not forget, and I think that we don't even need to cover it, the information warfare, the cyber warfare, which was new. Ukraine has been the country in the world that has become the playground of the most cyber attacks since actually 2014. So you have also new dimensions to the warfare next to the traditional conventional warfare, and all in all, you see actually how many layers this warfare has.
Okay, so Putin needed a villain, and there's usually villains from the present time, but he chose denazification in Ukraine as a justification for the war. And if you go through Europe, there are other countries that he could claim the same, right? Germany, I know you live in Austria. Austria had, Hitler didn't even have to invade Austria. He was welcomed with open arms. So is this something that he's going to continue to say he's freeing Europe from something that happened 70 years ago?
He continues and he still sticks to the same narrative. It's still about the so-called denazification and demilitarization of Ukraine, which practically means that Ukraine is not allowed to have an army, and it should be a neutral country, which actually Ukraine was in 2014 before it was invaded by Russia the first time. It had neutral status. So this is a thing that works on the psychology of at home. It's for domestic use. At the same time, if you take a look at the fact that the state-funded mercenary group of Russia, now we know for a fact because Putin confirmed it. We had the speculation before 2023, but Wagner PMC, the one that was under the leadership of Prigozhin, is a state-funded mercenary group, which is not dissolved, which is still active, and it has actually this name that also has links to Nazi symbolism. It was actually rebranded in this year. And guess what? The new name of this mercenary group is again linked to the Nazi Germany, history. It's now called Africa Corps. So all in all, this kind of dichotomy, between using narratives and looking at the reality, how this actually, works on the ground is, of course, quite stunning. But that's the reality.
So is Putin going into, the fact that support has been weak from the U.S. in the last several months? I don't know if they passed that bill or not for aid to Ukraine and Israel. And the fact that you say that countries in Europe are going to gravitate towards Russia. Natural gas is pretty cheap nowadays, but many countries are still dependent upon Russia. So is this going to be something that Putin's going to be successful with? And I know you talk about President Trump if he's elected, but you also say, what if neither Biden or Trump are elected? I saw in your stream. Can you elaborate on that?
Mm-hmm. Okay, first, we should clarify that there hasn't been such a strong and, let's say, coherent approach by most of the European states to Russia, to what happened in the last 2 years. That's for sure, even though that there were differences, and there are still differences in the European positions when it comes to, let's say, a strategic consensus as to, how much, for instance, to give Ukraine, or in which borders Ukraine should, regain its territories. I still argue that a clear messaging, such as let's provide all the necessary support for Ukraine so that Ukraine can regain its territory per 1991, which is the territory that Russia, the Russian Federation, has also internationally recognized. That kind of clear message would have been very helpful, but it did not happen for political reasoning. Yeah. Mostly because the big countries like Germany and France were still struggling to come up with, let's say, with an approach where they didn't want to see
money.
No, political reasoning. It's state raison. They didn't want. They feared that Russia, that sees itself confronted with a reality in which, let's say, it loses the war, it may do the unthinkable, like the use of nuclear weapon.
Desperation.
That is actually the reason behind it. Now, I said, and I want to highlight again that Putin sees an opportunity to, let's say, destabilize politically Europe by actually using all these toolbox instruments, and then creating a situation in which, let's say, there is a political reshuffle. For instance, in Austria, there will be an election this year. In the election, the likelihood that, let's say, a right-wing party wins the majority and then has, participates in the government, of course, gives such an opportunity. We saw different kind of contexts here in Europe where this, but in the American case, it's different. Why is it different? First, the rationale behind America's decision to support Ukraine is a little bit different from the one in Europe. In what way? From America's perspective, and I really touch upon only the geopolitical dimension. I don't want to go into the other dimensions, which are also important.
Understood.
The geopolitical dimension is that, from America's point of view, weakening Russia by supporting Ukraine was enough of a goal, of a geopolitical goal. In what sense? In a sense that China is the big competitor, and this is probably one of the few things on which both Democrats and Republicans agree in the long run. They may disagree on the approaches, they may disagree on the tools, but they agree on the let's say, long-term competitor. And because of that, weakening Russia was enough as a geopolitical goal, which has been already achieved. So now we have a situation with elections where we know for a fact that voters, and this is not an exception for United States, it's everywhere the same, they do not really react to foreign policy successes or foreign policy events. They want to see the economy working. They want to have jobs. They want to provide for their families. These are the emotions, and this is the psychology behind electoral voting, which is why we see now all this shift in the U.S. approach to Ukraine and to Russia, given the fact, as I said, that the main goal has been achieved from Americans' point of view, but it hasn't been achieved from Europe's point of view, because from the very beginning, it was actually Europe's task to support Ukraine, whatever it takes. And this is what did not happen. The promises of military aid, the ammunition that was actually, let's say, agreed upon, this was not delivered, or it was delivered, with the speed and in a scale that hasn't been enough. Clearly, as we saw
Is
with
it
the
just
last.
denial? Is it just denial, Velina? And the statement that Russia is just a big gas station. People
Um,
probably don't believe that anymore.
you mean denial of what exactly? A denial of the own
Yeah, of the
failure
threat,
to act, or
of the threat from Russia.
um, there is, I would say, it's to some extent, depending on geography, is really linked to a misperception of threat. If you are, let's say, based somewhere in the south of Europe,
Okay.
or even in the middle of Europe, like in Austria, the perception of threat is very different from what actually direct neighbor, um,
Estonia.
like Estonia,
Yeah.
perceives about the threat coming from Russia. And even the fact that Sweden and Finland decided to join NATO, despite actually the circumstances that the one was neutral for a period
Ever.
after the Second World War, and the other for the last 200 years, tells us a story that proximity plays a
Okay.
key role. So
Great point.
there is a sum of different perceptions of threat. There is a sum of different analysis on the security situation. So there is not one coherent European approach and not
Got it.
one coherent European policy, but it is a sum of the decisions of, let's say, 27 members, which makes the whole thing so slow
Difficult.
and
Yeah.
incohesive and difficult. And even though a lot has been achieved so far, in terms of sanctions, 12 packages right now, the 13 packages being discussed, in terms of different kind of policy or diversification away from, Russian gas and oil. But again, with a lot of complacency, with a lot
Yes.
of still based on dependence, as you said, in some cases like Austria, as we speak, in December, the share of Russian gas in the whole supply for the month was 98%.
Wow. Yeah. That's interesting. I tell you what, I have never seen so many pots boiling on the stove in my lifetime at once. Have you? Have you? I mean, this is your bailiwick. So I'd like to go to another one that's beginning to boil over and go to the Middle East. And we know how it all began. And we know that there are people seeking a truce, a ceasefire, trying to get hostages out. But I believe the bigger story is the U.S. and Iran and its proxies. And they both say, Velina, that they don't want a war with each other. Now, is that accurate, or is it that they don't want to be blamed and take responsibility for starting a war?
understood. And once again, I want to touch upon the geopolitical dimension, because I'm not a Middle East expert, but I deal a lot with the different linkages between the state actors and also non-state actors on the ground. This is my job. And I can assure you that prior to 7th of October, there was zero readiness on behalf of any of the key regional players on the ground, except for Hamas, to really start any kind of confrontation. In reality, the situation was exactly the opposite. There were series of really positive steps towards normalization of the relations between Israel on the one hand and different Arab countries on the other. There were different initiatives going on in a parallel, so to say, in a parallel track. The United States was promoting the normalization of the relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel, and there was this condition of the two-state solution being put on the table by the Saudis. But at the same time, we have to say also that this kind of mediation effort was actually pushed forward by another success, which was diplomatic success on behalf of China, which mediated between Iran and Saudi Arabia, which was a real big breakthrough
they've
from a
been
geopolitical
enemies
point
for how
of view.
long? They've been
Very,
enemies
very long time. In fact, these two countries used to be the two strategic pillars of the U.S. Middle East policy in the 70s. You know, that's the whole irony of these fluid geopolitical constellations, because both were actually strategic allies of the United States. Many don't know this or don't remember this anymore. And then, of course, with the with the dramatic shift in Iran and with the Shah, exactly. So things really went south in the relationship between Iran and United States for many, many reasons. Again, we have the Middle East experts. They can explain all these dynamics. What is now important from an external perspective, from the point of an external geopolitical perspective, is to say that the constellations were pointing to a very positive scenario for the region.
Someone didn't want it to happen.
And actually, the reason for this positive scenario was also more or less the case of this competition between the United States and China, which was creating positive conditions for, for the key players, because they had more options. They had more options for trade. They had more options for all these newly emerging transport and energy corridors connecting Asia, Europe, and Africa. So you have like three continents, and they were just in the middle of it. And the very fact that there was even a new terminology, like suddenly this was no longer the Middle East, it was the West Asia, practically to link it to to Southeast Asia, to South Asia, with India now becoming third world's economic power, China being in the lead. So we had all these positive dynamics, and then the 7th of October happened, and still I argue, even though that we are in the most precarious crisis with immense humanitarian consequences, huge, actually unthinkable. I would say right now we are in the most gruesome phase of the war. The war will continue until actually the Israeli government can announce a clear victory. Here we won't have like a gray zone. It will have to be a victory at all costs, and the cost is so immense that in the end it may turn into a kind of Pyrrhic victory, right? There is this, I hope that I say it correctly to be understood what I mean. In a sense, despite all the dynamics, I see no clear signals on behalf of Iran and also on behalf of the United States that they want to get involved in any kind of direct military confrontation. Again, given the fact that it's an election year for United States, and at the same time, given the fact that Iran has all these proxies that it can activate in Iraq, in Yemen, in Syria, and obviously also in Gaza. So there are many more options than the option of a direct military confrontation. So in a sense, I think that the temperature of it's a war. It's a devastating war. We see actually a situation in which things will not going to go to a normal or to to the situation as it was before the 7th of October.
Okay.
And yet I think that on both sides, with China and Russia obviously gaining geopolitically because of the narrative. The narrative now is that the West has applied double standards. It has supported Ukraine, and now actually it is supporting Israel. So in the one case, it supports the country that has been attacked. In the other case, it supports the aggressor. So it's a whole narrative. We are in an information war. And the information war is real. It's really about, dominating the information space in a Cold War 2.0 scenario.
Well,
right?
we're going to make a dent in that. We're putting up a little stand here with what you're due to give clarity to people for them to really have an understanding. So we talk about this. We talked Ukraine and the Middle East that the U.S. is involved in one way or another. They have all their carriers, a lot of carriers in the Red Sea. Does China see this as an opportunity with the U.S. stretched out and in, a political crisis of our own here in the U.S., that this may be a good time for them to make their move on Taiwan?
Yeah, that's the big question. I belong to the group that is still not convinced that China would militarily attack Taiwan, even in this context right now, with the crisis in the Red Sea, with the United States being already overstretched.
Yeah.
I think that the incentive for the Chinese leadership, given the fact that they are undergoing tremendous economic turbulences at home, and from the point of view of a communist party, you need to understand that the rationale of a communist party is a very different from the rationale of, let's say, government that has to undergo elections every 3, 4, 5 years. Why? Because the rationale of the Communist Party is always to seek, first and foremost, stability at home, domestic stability at any price. And in a scenario of a military attack on Taiwan, with already ongoing troubles at home, this will create further pressure on not just the population, but it will we will see a blockage, let's say, of further global choke points. The Strait of Taiwan, the Strait of Malacca, which is critically important for the shipping of oil to China. All of this is going to, see a similar scenario of what we saw with Russia's war against Ukraine, with the Black Sea, and what we are seeing now with the Red Sea, which plays into the hand of China for the moment. Chinese ships and tankers are not under threat. It's enough to put, a flag Chinese crew only, and you don't have problems in the Red Sea. So it's a problem for the West. It's a problem for the United States. So going back to Taiwan, I think that that's my scenario. In my scenario, in the most plausible scenario, China actually would apply that by 1,000 cuts approach to Taiwan. That means simultaneous political, economic, and societal penetration. So you're trying to slowly destroy the social fabric, because it's the most vibrant democracy in the region. It's like an open box of chocolates. You can always pick whatever you like, in a sense that China can launch different agents, provocateurs, the different groups that can create societal pressure. It can buy important, let's say, lobby groups or players at home. It can actually create slow pressure on the economy of Taiwan. And then, of course, it will use political players. We saw actually during the election campaign in January that one of the three key parties was more or less rooting for a different scenario than the one presented by the former vice president, which is now, the new president of Taiwan. So all in all, I think that this death by thousand cuts is a small, slow, small steps process, a slow process, gradual process of small cuts to the system, which the system cannot identify, and then at some point of time in the future, you have like subjugation without the need to fight. I think that this is
Okay.
more reasonable, unless, of course, there is a black swan event, like an event that we cannot foresee, which puts, the Chinese leadership under pressure to act swiftly and to show,
What could
um,
that be? Have you
we
thought
don't
of any?
know.
That's why it's a
That's
black
the
swan?
whole that's why it's called black swan. These are these kind of irrational events, which in the world of geopolitics tend to happen from time to time, where decision makers are making almost impossible decisions, which make no sense from rational point of view. Like the case with the 24th of February. I belong to those who were absolutely convinced that there will be a war. My scenario was from December 2021, saying there will be a war. It will start after February 20th, and it will be called special military operation, and it will be
Oh,
conducted in the south and east of Ukraine, because this was the most rational thing to do. To have a gradual subjugation in a period of 10, 15 years. And what happened actually is that Russia attacked from 5 different directions, including from Belarus, which did not make any sense, because the army, the armed forces, as we saw, they were not prepared for this, for this
right.
kind of war. So what I'm trying to say is that there is also an irrational dimension that we cannot foresee. But if there is a situation in which it is really about the power struggle within the highest echelons of power in China, and you need a foreign policy success, you need to make a move
Right.
like the
That's a
one.
dictator's playbook when things
This
are
is a
going bad,
dictator's.
right? Right.
Exactly. So
And
if this
plus,
is the case,
China, with their demographic issue, through the one child policy, they have a lot of men that they don't know, they can't find jobs. There's a lot of Chinese immigration even to the US. It's gone up fivefold across the border here of Chinese fleeing economic repression and so forth. So um,
so
that could
again,
be,
this is
yeah,
another scenario of the future, of a, let's say, possible future, where some colleagues, some experts are convinced that we will see, or we will see, actually a military attack launched by China on Taiwan before 2027.
okay. You know what? You have given me hope in a world that's filled with, you know, very difficult situations, that warfare has changed from it only being kinetic, that it's different, and that a lot of countries can fall from within without an external military conflict, just like the Soviet Union did,
That's
right?
correct. Yes, it took. We should not forget that United States won the competition over the third industrial revolution in the middle of the 70s. Starting from there, it took the Soviet Union how much 20 years almost to collapse. So
Yeah.
we should not underestimate the ability of failing systems. I would like really to highlight the keyword system, failing system, to really collapse. So here, once again, now we are hearing from a lot of experts on China that China is about to collapse because of the demography issues, because of the problems at home in terms of economy, the trade war with the United States, all of these different layers of, of competition and of decoupling. But it may take a lot of years. It may, let's say, once again, be very, very much accelerated, triggered by certain, unexpected events or chain of events. But it could also take a lot of years before we see really a system collapsing.
Okay. Well, I did want to show your website. It's called Face, and where people need to go and sign up for your
They can join,
excellent stuff.
exactly. So here you see, you can actually join the weekly free newsletter, which
There you
comes
go.
out. Yes, it's a weekly newsletter where I point to some key geopolitical events that have taken place in the last week, and I, present some analysis, also point to some upcoming events. I do organize workshops in person here in Vienna on geopolitics topics, but also, of course, I consult mostly on geopolitical risks, trends, scenarios. Again, together with client, we just try to make sense of the geopolitical context, the likelihood of events, as you ask your questions like, do I think that, for instance, there will be a military attack on Taiwan? These are questions that a lot of business CEOs are dealing with on a daily basis, or
Yes.
like traders need to, make sense of this context, this geopolitical context, under the lack of, information. But maybe just to end up with some positive notes at the end. I don't want it to be just too dark and too, pessimistic. And I know that some colleagues really capitalize on fear and panic,
Yeah.
but actually, maybe the most positive news is that, um, even if we are in this right now in this really precarious competition of not just two, but actually between three key players, so United States on the one hand, China and Russia on the other, and it is really about the future of the global order. Each one of these key players wants to dominate, wants to impose their reading of, interpretation of rules, of standards, of norms. Um, uh, this competition will create a lot of opportunities. A lot of corners of the world will see actually opportunities, because there will be more options, and more options on the ground under the, under the conditions of competitions are good news for people, for businesses, for traders. A lot of things will be in demand, commodities, obviously. And also, I just don't see any signals about the readiness of any of the three to get involved in any direct confrontation. So all of these kind of things that we've been hearing over the last 2 years, such as NATO, Russia confrontation, war, World War III. I mean, the constraints under the nuclear umbrella, the mutual assured destruction doctrine is still alive and kicking, and these are, players that understand the limitations and the these are responsible players, in a sense that unfortunately the number of the hotspots has increased. Indeed, we're living now in a time where the number of military conflicts hasn't been that high since the end of the Cold War, but at the same time, all these hotspots will be under the below the threshold of a let's say conventional
Yes.
war between these major players.
Okay. Well, what a great way to end it. You're not just a geopolitical strategist, you're a watchman for all kinds of people. So that when people get all this disinformation and hear about rumors, they can read what you're writing and follow you and get a perspective from, uh, I feel wiser today than I did 40 minutes ago. And that's because of you, Velina. Really
Thank you, Dale.
appreciate your hard work. You could tell when someone is a hard worker and has passion for what they do, and you exude that. And I'm so grateful that I was persistent in bringing you here to TradeGate Hub. It was really a pleasure.
Thank you very much. I do appreciate it, and I wish also good luck, of course, to all the traders watching us, listening to us, and yeah, maybe at the end, just keep an eye on the supply chains
Okay.
because the disruption is irreversible. That means there will be also globalization,
Shortages.
but with
Yeah.
other, yes, but with with let's say, different definition of globalization, like regional globalization, regional integration, but certainly what we've seen over the last 30 years in terms of scale and scope of globalization under the American umbrella of global power projection, this is certainly over. And
Yeah.
this, once again, from the perspective of traders, will open up a lot of opportunities, but for those who are not prepared, could also, mean a lot of risks.
Yes. Okay. So Velina Tchakarova has joined us here on Phase. Follow Velina, and perhaps we could get back together another several months and see how things are developing. Again, thank you for granting the interview, Velina. I enjoyed speaking with you.
It's been
Appreciate
a
it.
great pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Okay. So everyone, there you go. You could exhale now and relax. We've heard from Velina. Thank you. Remember, don't just count your pips, your money, your barrels of oil, your stock shares. Count your blessings, and we could come out of our bomb shelters. Thank you. See you, Velina.
Thank you. Thank you. It's
All
been a
right.
pleasure. I hope that I did not
It was
deviate
great.
too much.
It
It's
was It was
you can
great. It
you
was
can
great.
probably see a person who can talk about these topics for hours. It's
Uh,
very, very difficult to
yeah,
shrunk itself in the time,
it was
been
great.
watching at the clock all the time and like, stop it here.
Uh,
Make a cut, make a cut.
yeah, thanks for letting me interrupt you today.
Yeah.
Thanks, Velina. See
Thank
ya.
you.
Great
Stay
meeting you.
safe. Thank you. Bye
You
bye.